The city health commissioner says categorically this gay pride parade poses no health hazard. Now that is an issue because of the AIDS epidemic. Governor Cuomo announcing $5.25 million state dollars will be spent to battle AIDS over the next 2 years. In our question to the city health commissioner, will it make a dent? Will it make a difference?
This much money coming into the research community is going to undoubtedly be of a great help, particularly if the money can be put out in a hurry.
The governor's $5 million Aid for AIDS program will spend about $3 million this year. Governor Cuomo deciding to spend that money because he felt the federal government was not doing enough. But a random sampling of Congress people shows us that the attitude in Congress appears to be changing.
I want to go back to, you kind of touched on it again. Again, you were diagnosed during an AIDS epidemic, and you're seeing all these people drop. How to help? I asked this question to someone else. How did y'all manage through this? Because that has to take a toll on your mental.
It does. It takes a toll on your mental and emotional health. So for a long time I felt like damaged goods. I got a lot of validation from the wrong places. My identity, there was a time when my identity was really tied to sex, to my I had a very complicated, layered relationship to sex. And if I wasn't loved, if I didn't feel loved, especially after my family was like, get lost, change or leave, don't come anywhere near our kids, we don't want you to infect them with homosexuality. I sought out to feed my self-esteem through validation. And so it was very important for me to feel attractive, to be attractive, to be desired, and I was very invested in that. And so my HIV positive status really threw a wrench in that, and so I tried to be honest. I really did try to be honest, especially when it came to people that I was interested in, or people that I was engaging in, or wanted to engage with sexually. There was no, I didn't know. Do I come in, hi, off the gate, hi, my name is Robin, I'm HIV positive, or do I wait? And so there were times when I would just say it off the gate, and people would be like, yeah, I can't deal with this, sorry, I'm out. And then there were times where I was like, okay, well, maybe let them get to know me first. So there would be 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Do I tell them on the third date? Do I tell them on the second date? Do I tell them? When do I tell them? Like, when is the right time? And one of the things that the campaign and being so public about my status has, 'cause I'm in my 29th year of being HIV positive. And so really, the freedom of being open about my status, like I would about, any stat, right? My stats. I'm 5'8" and a half. I've got brown hair, I've got brown eyes, I identify as a cisgender male, I identify as gay, I'm mixed race, Latino and Greek. But those are nationalities. But there's a lot in here that makes up this, and so and my status is just among that, right? It's just one of those things. But it has brought me freedom to be able to just, you know, there's no hiding it anymore. It's just a matter of fact. That's it. It is no longer a weapon that can be used against me, you know. And at this point, you know, I've done enough of the work that if somebody wants to reject me because of my status in 2022 with everything that we have available, then kick rocks. Like I dodged the bullet, you know what I'm saying? But it wasn't always that way, you know. And I always come back to this one story. There was a boy that I met. I used to see him riding around on his rollerblades, and I thought he was connected to another friend of mine because everybody was on rollerblades. And so I remember that one summer that the two of them were riding their rollerblades on the pier, and they both looked so beautiful. But one of them was a friend of mine, and you know, when he introduced me, I was like, and so I meet the guy at a club, and we hang out one night, and we made out, and he was really pushing up, but I was like, do I tell him, do I not tell him? And so instead I kind of like wormed my way out of the sexual situation, allowed myself to make out with him a little bit, like we watched the sunrise. It was very romantic, and then we met a second time for a date, but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be at his house or my house because I didn't want to be tempted, you know, to let something happen. And then we went on a third date, and then on the fourth date I went to his house, and we made out some more, and we did some stuff, but it wasn't, you know, like a full-on sexual experience. And then I decided I was gonna tell him. Like, I was really falling for this guy, and I decided I was gonna tell him. So and that night I had made a CD of like random music that I really liked. You know, music was a way for me to communicate. And so I asked him to meet me at the pier, and he showed up on his rollerblades, and we were gonna watch the sunset. And ironic that this story ends with the sun. It starts with the sunrise and it ends with the sunset. I never realized that before. So I told him, like, I was telling him that I really liked him, and he was like, why are you getting so serious? And I was like, well, I really need to tell you something. And I was like, so I'm HIV positive. And I remember his whole face cracked, and he couldn't look at me. And he got up and he said, I'm sorry, I can't do this, I can't watch you die. And he sped off on his rollerblades, and I just sat there like, what the fuck just happened? And of course I blamed myself for telling him. I was like, fuck, I should have waited to tell him. Maybe I shouldn't have told him at all, you know. And so, but those rejections were so, like, I couldn't handle them. So each one of those made me go back in the closet with my status.
Back then, so I mean, I can't really speak for everyone else, but I can speak for myself and how dating went. And back then, it was a lot harder for me to find like a girlfriend before, you know, I realized and I understood that I liked women and only women. You know, I had a few boyfriends and things like that. But I was always very upfront with my disclosing, right? I kind of typically within the first couple of days, I would tell you about my status. And for me, it was kind of just like either you like me or you don't. And if that's a deal breaker, then I need to know now because I can't change it. And so back then there was a lot more rejection in that aspect. When people found out, they would ghost me, or they would go and try to tell my story for me even though they didn't actually know it, they just knew my status. There was a lot of stuff back then that it really bothered me as someone who was HIV positive, and for one has had undetectable status for more than 15 years now. You know, it was hard. Now with having U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable, as well as with the different medication regimens, how much, like almost they're a little easier to maintain just because there's typically less of them, so more people are maintaining that undetectable status. And because of that, it's more people, at least I'm finding, more people are open to dating somebody who has HIV or whatever else. Well, I shouldn't say whatever else, but who has HIV or AIDS for that matter, who's in that controlled realm. Yeah, I haven't had as much bad luck, I guess you could say. There's more understanding. There may be a little bit of honesty of like, it's just not quite for me. But I've had less people do that, and more people be like, hey, if you're undetectable and you're taking your medicine, I see that you're healthy, doing your thing, I'm good. So that's kind of thankfully been the take for my last couple of relationships and how they've felt about it. They've been much more understanding, and it's kind of an afterthought. I take my medicine every single night to maintain my HIV, undetectable status. But from my relationship standpoint, it's in the background while still remaining important. But when it comes to dating in general, I can only speak from my experience. But from my experience, I prefer to be upfront, because if someone doesn't like you or is going to stigmatize you or is going to they're going to show their true colors about how they feel about it, and I would like to hear about that very early on before I get invested. Unfortunately, some people don't just have that closure where they walk away from that person. Sometimes that other person becomes combative, or they try to kind of slander you with telling your story and things. But I thankfully haven't experienced any of that, but some of my friends have.
I got to watch the people depositing the ashes on the White House. A woman from the local Washington, D.C. area interviewed me and asked me, did I see what happened? I said, yes, and she asked about this. And I said, the purpose of these people coming here is because George Bush and his administration has done nothing with our lives, so we bring our dead to you. And they were determined to deposit the ashes of their loved ones on the White House steps. And with those horses, not even wild horses, could have kept those people away.
Two things. One is the inspirational quality. I saw that mother with her ashes that everyone's talking about, and after she threw them, she turned around and went, yes! And we all felt that at other things. And if we could re-co-opt her rage and her grief from the quilt to us, we were successful. And if we could do this for us, who gives a shit about the media? It was for us. The action was to deliver the ashes, and we did it. And I also want to remind everyone that what George Bush talked about last night when he said act up was stop the church almost 3 years ago. He didn't talk about Kennebunkport. He didn't talk about Campaign 92. He did not talk about what had taken place that day. And we need to remember that stop the church is pretty easy to convince people about what an evil group of perverts we are, right? No. But there was so much rightness in what we did yesterday, and everyone should be proud.
This action was coordinated by Shane, who was relatively new to ACT UP and never organized an action before. In the van on the way down, he was going to kill me for repeating this. He confessed that he'd been having nightmares all week about this action, and that one of them was that we would all depart Washington afterwards and leave him behind.
So, around intimacy, being an HIV positive individual, this will be the first time I'm sharing this. Because I never, even when I was escorting, I had a list. So I had a list of 5 individuals, and that lasted me through a whole decade. So I've never been out to really promiscuous. I was never promiscuous and out there. When it came to relationships and having to interact, being that I always took care of myself, for me, I just never divulged that information to my clients. The clients never asked, so I never divulged. My relationship, I did divulge to my ex, and during our relationship, he ended up testing positive. But at first I was like, oh my gosh, because I was undetectable at the time. No, hold on. He tested positive when I was during my chemo. We wasn't sexually active, but he got really sick and tested positive when I was on my 3rd round of chemo. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I gave this to you. And he was like, no, I never went in to get tested prior to me meeting you. And he had been stepping out and doing other things. This all ended up coming out, but it has shook me to the core. And even to this day, in my current marriage, my husband is negative, I'm undetectable, we engage, we don't use condoms in our sex. He did start off on PrEP, but then he felt like, it just wasn't from him. He didn't like the way I was making him feel. And you have people that are just you have more people that are open to having sex with people that are HIV positive. Back in the day, people used to call them bug chasers, but I feel like it's kind of also situational. Me and my husband are married. We'll be married for 3 years this August. So for him, that decision for him, that's his personal decision. But for me, it still scares me because even though I'm undetectable, when you're undetectable, that means that you're untransmittable. You cannot pass the virus sexually. When we talked about numbers earlier, let me go back to numbers. Viral undetectable means that the HIV virus, when they take the test, the numbers it reads back are under 200. That's when you're virally suppressed, so that you can't pass the virus. When you're undetectable, that means that the HIV numbers are less than 50 in your blood. Because people say if there's no cure, you have HIV, you have HIV. So yes, even though we say undetectable, untransmittable, those are the numbers, 200 and under 50. The virus cannot be picked up, you can't transmit it. But here goes the part for me. You know how we always say things are changing, medicines are changing, people can become resistant. So what about me and my husband? We, making love down for years. And then all of a sudden without me knowing the medicine, because you have to go to the doctor every 3 months. Some people it's twice a year. Some people since the pandemic is once a year. So unless you get sick, you're not going to get tested for your numbers because you're taking your medicine, it does what it does. So what about your medicine stops working? And now you are detectable again. And now your partner becomes HIV positive. 15 years down the line, y'all been, no cheating, been together. So for me, that's a heavy load to still even carry. Again, I kind of feel like it's more heavier than me being with someone sexually and not telling them my status.
Well, now it's not necessarily as big a deal as it once was because of PrEP. But back then, some people were educated, some were not. I think on my profiles, I'm trying to remember what exactly I put down. I remember back when I first became positive, I remember Manhunt was the big hookup website at that time. So I would do, actually the first person who I met who I hooked up with who was HIV positive, before I became HIV positive, I kind of followed his lead in it and just put Ask Me to start that, so we can have that conversation. As far as people who I actually met in person, at a bar hookup or whatever, if I still was very stern about using condoms, and I still feel to this day, if you're taking that precaution of using condoms, you don't necessarily have to have that discussion of disclosing. because you're already taking the precaution by using the condom. And I always feel like when you like want to make someone feel bad for not saying something, that becomes more like a bit of a sexual superiority that you're trying to exude, which is very prevalent among gay men. So that's why I always felt like if I'm going to use a condom with you, yeah, I don't necessarily have to, but sometimes I did feel this person might, in a conversation with someone, that they might feel a little weird. So it's like, let me just make sure and say this, because some people would be like, because there have been some people who I have encountered back then who, even if you know you're going to use a condom, they still get weird about it. And so it's like, okay, you're going to be one of those people. So it's like, never mind.
We charge you with genocide. Bringing the dead to your door. We won't take it anymore. Bringing the dead to your door. We won't take it anymore. Bringing the dead to your door. We won't take it anymore. Bringing the dead to your door. We are taking our walk back to scatter on the White House.
From pretty early on, and in my treatment for substance use, I was very vocal about my status. While I was a very shy person, and I know that's not the person you see before you today, I was like that my whole life, which is why I say I didn't want to be the person I was before. I wanted to be this new and improved person. And so a lot of people knew my status already who I met. So it was very hard for someone I didn't meet a lot of people who didn't already know my status. So intimacy came through folks who already knew I was HIV positive, and we then built an intimate relationship or just had an intimate time. So they already knew. But of course, I've had times where I've met people who didn't know my status, and I have had to disclose, and I've never had a real negative or rejection or horrible experience. So I had one, and I always say I needed to have this so when I help others, I can also come from a place of, I get it. I had one which ended up being okay even then, but I met somebody and totally wasn't even thinking of going out or dating, but we ended up dating, and I went back to their apartment, we had some coffee, and I didn't have sex with them. In their head, they made up a whole story about why I wasn't having sex, but I put it off, and the next time we went out to dinner, I said, we need to have a conversation. I need to tell you why I didn't just basically jump into bed with you. And they're like, are you gay? And because I guess in their head, see, everybody relates to a situation based on what's happened to them prior, right? So that's where all our experiences start to create this little filter in our brain. And so when something familiar comes up, we look at it through the lens of that filter. And so in his life, he's had a situation where he met a woman and he wanted to sleep with her, and she was gay. And she's like, oh no, that's not what this is. It's a friendship. So right away he thought that's what it was. So I come out with something that's then pretty traumatic in his eyes. And I'm like, no, I'm HIV positive. So then we're sitting in a Japanese restaurant. We're on the tatami, in the tatami room, I think it's called. And we're sitting on the floor, we're eating Japanese food, and he starts breaking down. And he's crying, and I'm like, oh Lord, what do I do now? In this situation where I'm the one who's being really strong, and I'm like, listen, I'm fine. I'm taking my medications regularly. I'm doing good things for myself. And that's not what you should worry about. I just felt like I wanted to make sure that you knew my status before anything went further. So that was one of the instances, should I say. Everyone else pretty much, not that there were a lot at that point in my recovery, but anyone else who asked me out already knew my status.
My name is Phyllis, and I'm a woman who's been living with AIDS. And what I'm really here to say is I also have not been politically active, but just being here this weekend and walking from the quilt was so much like, what is this all about? I am so grateful to everyone that's in ACTA, that fights with us and for us, and that just has the spirit, the passion to keep fighting. You know, I just love you all, and thanks so much.
Well, look, it looks like we're going to get rained on, so we even timed this perfectly. Two last things. The first is, when you leave here, leave in groups. The police like to pick individuals off.